Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you're having a wonderful time wherever you happen to be watching this. I apologize for making our final pre-Thanksgiving lesson a remote one, but unfortunately, I am forced to do so due to the vagaries of life and dental appointments. So, today we're talking about an important event, but one of those that I do feel pretty comfortable doing remotely. I mean, all of our lessons are technically remote. But how Europe rose, how Europe came to become the hegemon of global society. And we have to start with kind of repairing what we had where we left Europe, and then move into the actual pieces where we talk about Europe's power structure, such as it is. Okay, so where we last left Europe, um, which, depending on your interpretation, would have either been the Crusades lesson or the lesson before that one, we talked about how the 1300s had not exactly been a great run for European nations, really, no matter where they were. The weather had been dismal, and that was before plague arrived. Roughly half of the people, or half the population, had died in the first half of the 1300s. And even if you discount all of that, even if you could somehow go back in time and keep the climate warm and keep the plague from arriving in Europe, the continent was still rightfully considered a backwater by Dar al-Islam, by the powerful West African states, and of course by the Chinese and other Asiatic empires. Put simply, if you could warp back to, let's be fair and say 1250, you probably would not choose Europe as your place to live. Um, and so as the 1400s roll forward, Europe is beginning to pick up the pieces a little bit. It's still cold, especially compared to a lot of other locations. The distance trade is still limited, and most of the time it is other imperial states taking cold hard cash from Europe and giving them their goods. Now that's problematic for a number of reasons, but probably the biggest one, of course, is the fact that you will eventually run out of gold and silver. I can always grow more nutmeg. Europe's goods were simply not of interest to most people. A few Central Asian traders found high quality wool to be a good trade good, but most people buying European goods were other Europeans. Now, I am broad brushing there. Please don't get me wrong. This depiction of Europe as the Dark Ages is an overcorrection. Um, but it is still worthy to note that if you told me, hey, you have to go back to one of the states in our time period from 1200 to 1450, I'm picking like Ming Dynasty China or the pre-Mongol Abbasid Caliphate way before I'm picking any European state. Okay, now I have to do something that is very difficult to do. I'm about to try to sell you on the good pieces of the Black Death. Um, that's not an easy sell, and I'm aware of that. So please don't get me wrong. Um, just like when I said all that stuff about how, yes, the Mongols had some positives, but you have to understand the crushing negatives that are associated with having somebody show up, burn down your house, and carry off your family. Same thing here. I am not wishing to mitigate, if you look at the chart, I am not wishing to mitigate this. That is not normal. That should not ever happen. And I do not wish to just ignore the suffering of those who died in droves of the plague. So, with that huge disclaimer in mind, um, as Europe begins to crawl back through the latter half of the 1400s, and population decline, you'll notice, did actually continue even after the plague was gone, um, you begin to see something interesting happen. and you begin to see a more sustainable population. They're no longer farming all of the most marginal land with just the barest of gaps between food produced and starvation. Um, you begin to see this population of workers with more food and more pay begin to grow. And the reason for more food is simple. You seeded your field before the plague hit. You had planned on the village having 250 people, and now there's only 125 of them, so everybody gets a double portion. Bright side, yay. You also begin to see workers getting higher pay because they can negotiate it. They can say, oh, you don't want to pay me? Well, the guy across the valley does, so see you later. A lot of historians say that this is the breakdown of the feudal system. Again, that's kind of a broad brush thing because feudalism was never an official system anywhere. But it does represent a massive shift in the medieval economy. Now, of greater importance to our class, I could dwell on that all day, but this ain't a European history course. Of larger importance for our class is that thanks to people like Marco Polo and increased contacts due to the Crusades with the Middle East, you begin to see Europeans becoming aware of trade goods outside of Europe that you really want to get a hold of. Silk and spice being the big ones. And so Europeans begin to coordinate efforts to get into that Silk Road trade and the Indian Ocean trade. And we kind of mentioned this. We'll talk about it again when we get to Spanish colonialism and to an extent Portuguese colonialism as well. How the Ottoman Turks had kind of locked Europe out of direct access to the Silk Road. So Europeans are going to begin to look for ways around the block created by the Turks. Now, one thing we have to ask ourselves whenever we talk about this is why not China? China, we saw very recently sending out a huge treasure fleet of advanced ships with advanced navigation. Why didn't they discover the Americas? Which, yes, there is that one random historian who voluntarily misinterprets his sources and claims that China did discover the Americas, but he has no actual, evidence that would stand up to any sort of scrutiny. So, um, one critical factor to European exploration, though, is unlike China, unlike the Arab sailors who dominated Indian Ocean trade, unlike even the merchants of East Africa, Europe didn't have access to the good stuff. And what I mean by that is, yeah, I don't have any doubt in my mind that Chinese or Arabian navigators could have discovered the Americas, such that you can discover anywhere that has millions of people already on it. But they didn't have to because they already had quite a lot of money. Why would they need to carve out a new trade route to anywhere when they already had access to the wealthiest and biggest trade routes of their era? Europe didn't have that. Europe would not be able to directly get access to Indian Ocean trade, and so they had to go out to get the goods that they wanted. And that's a huge piece of it. There's another piece we don't think too much about. Europe is very divided, and division generates competition. Now, that's not always good. Europe's going to have a whole lot more internal strife throughout the medieval period than a lot of other places. But that interstate rivalry means that every nation is going to be competing with its neighbors. So, as Portugal, for example, because they're going to be the first ones, as Portugal gains wealth, through trading with West Africa, through the burgeoning, unfortunately, slave trade, through establishing some of the first sugar plantations, through eventually getting a direct route to India, their neighbors, Spain, are going to get jealous. And as the Spanish begin to go outward and explore explore, they're going to see other states become jealous of them. Eventually, guys, European nations are going to establish colonies. We're really only going to talk about the really, really, really huge colonial ones that have a lot of macro historical impact. We're going to talk about Portugal. We're going to talk about Spain. We're going to talk about France. We're going to talk about Britain. But we could, oh, and we're going to talk about the Dutch. But we could talk about a whole lot of other ones. Y'all, Sweden had colonies in the New World. Denmark had colonies in the New World. And the one I like the most, Lithuania had colonies in the New World. That is a lot of diversity compared to what you're normally told with the classic trio of, yes, Spain, France, and Britain. We got to expand and look at why Europe did this, and the big reason is because they were divided. This interstate rivalry meant that they were constantly competing with one another. China, for most of its history, was a unitary state. The Muslim world, by this point in time, has those three big empires, the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals, and they're pretty content with what they have, or they're busy fighting each other. All that means they don't really have nearly as much impetus to go out and try to find new routes or new lands. The other reason that Europeans are going to see a gain in going outward, and I keep using the word exploration because I don't have a good substitute word for it. I'm sure someone way smarter than I am has one, but please understand I use the term exploration mostly because it's the one we're familiar with, not because I actually believe that Europeans discovered all that much. It was exploration for the Europeans. Is that a fair way of saying it? I think so. European elites also stood to gain from going outward. The church, which remember in Europe, your religious choices were pretty much be Catholic or be on fire. The church saw the opportunity to get more converts, monarchs, other nobles, other ranking members of society saw the opportunity to gobble up chunks of land or to gain new resources or to gain new taxation sources. And so they begin to encourage people to go out. Lower ranking nobles were making up a lot of the early explorers were some form of extremely minor nobility because that was their best way to get some fame and some fortune of their own. And of course, merchants always saw the opportunity to gain some trade, some profit. Nice deal. You can see, of course, a spice market here. Lots of tasty stuff there. Please remember, this is one that is worthy to note. All these folks, the church, the monarchs, the merchants, they all believed that they were going to get all of this stuff out of China and India and Asia, to a lesser extent Africa. None of them thought they were getting this out of the Americas because they didn't know there were Americas. Okay, a huge piece to European exploration is also technology, almost all of which is imported. I'm going to go ahead and put a box around it. These are the technologies that are going to enable Europe to sail outward. And they're, you'll notice, pretty much all borrowed. The astrolabe and the compass, borrowed from the Muslim world and China. Rudders for easier steering, China. The lateen sail, where you tack into the wind. There's some debate on where that one comes from. I personally think it's Malaysia, but there's a lot of people who argue it's Arab sailors. Probably not Europe, though. Gunpowder weaponry, originally developed in China, going to be very useful for the violence in the Americas. And all of this is going to combine to create the ships that will enable Europeans to have survivable long distance travel. There's always somebody who wants to split hairs. Well, you could cross the Atlantic in a canoe. Yes, you could. You individually probably could. But you are not going to start a colonial effort with just yourself and a kayak full of Cliff Bars. These survivable long distance open water voyages are enabled by these ships, like the Caravel and the Carrack, which are stuffed to the gills with technologies that originated outside of Europe. We're actually going to skip this one. The people who are going to lead the exploration are Portugal, Spain, France, and England, and that's because they're on the western edge of Europe. So I'm not going to bore you with that detail. All right, this one's big. There are a lot of European explorations, and historians have a nasty habit of going off into the weeds and going, ooh, we need to talk about this one. Ooh, we need to talk about this one. We need to talk about this one. No. We're going to talk about two European explorations specifically and the impacts thereof, and here they are. Number one, the one you're familiar with, Christopher Columbus's arrival in the Americas in 1492. Number two, the one you might not be as familiar with, Vasco da Gama's arrival in India in 1497, his first voyage to India. Those are the two voyages of Europeans to the to the Americas and India that you must be aware of. Because for the next huge chunk of history, those voyages are going to indelibly change international relations, internal relations, religious affairs, the development of the slave trade. You could argue even the development of something like the Enlightenment. All of them are going to be heavily influenced by these guys. And so our grand finale. Um, I hate to use the metaphor because it's cliche as all get out, but it really does work, and I know I've used it before. The closest thing human beings have experienced to an alien invasion took place in October of 1492, when a group of people standing on the shores of the Bahamas were greeted with visitors from, as far as they were concerned, another world. This is the first time that the Western and Eastern hemispheres have been brought together permanently in at least 10,000 years. Again, signs point to it actually being longer than that when Columbus's ships make landfall in what is now the Bahamas. Now, some of you who are more history buff than others are like, ooh, but what about the Vikings? That's why the word permanently is in there. There are, quite frankly, no long-term major impacts of the Vikings' arrival in the Americas outside of alternate histories and the breed of cats known as the Maine Coon might be descended from Viking cats. That's about it. The Columbian Exchange, I can point you to a bunch of concrete facts. If you want to debate that with me, feel free to. You'll lose, but I'll happily debate you with that. Columbus is Italian. He is employed by the King of Spain, and his theory is that he can sail to Asia by going west, by sailing out of Spain. Let's see if I can mark this. There you are. Sailing out of Spain and going all the way around the ocean. Now, there happened to be some inconvenient continents in the way, which blocked him from being able to go around the globe. But slowly but surely, after his arrival in the Americas, the people of Europe came to realize that they had discovered something new and something potentially much more lucrative. And we will see how that colonization goes in our next lesson. Thanks for sticking with you guys. Please make sure that you know the basic guts of this, things like new technologies, why Europe, why not the more established civilizations. Please make sure you have that stuff because I do, of course, reserve the right to ask you about it. Thank you for your time. Have a great day. Have a happy Thanksgiving. I will see all of you next Tuesday.